Why Iran's protests feel different. This time, Iran has seen protests before. In 2009, in 2019, in 2022. But this time, something feels different. These protests are not simply louder, they are broader, more intense, and far more threatening to the system in power. So what has changed? This wave of unrest did not begin with ideology or political slogans. It began with economic collapse. Iran's currency has fallen sharply. Inflation has eroded daily life. Basic essentials, food, rent, fuel, have become unaffordable for millions. When protests are driven by livelihood rather than ideology, they spread faster, because economic pressure cuts across class, age, and belief. Everyone feels it. In earlier waves of unrest, protests were largely confined to major cities. Tehran, a handful of urban centers. This time, demonstrations have spread across almost every province of Iran. Workers, students, shopkeepers, oil region laborers, not one city, not one social group. A nationwide spread like this unsettles any state, because it stretches security forces thin and makes centralized control far more difficult. What truly defines this moment, however, is the response. Security forces have used lethal force. Mass arrests have followed. Internet and communication networks have been repeatedly shut down. When a government cuts off the internet, it is rarely about silencing anger alone. It is about preventing coordination. At that point, the state is no longer managing unrest. It is fighting to retain control. There is also a critical political shift underway. In earlier protests, demands focused on reform, fair elections, policy changes, specific rights. This time, many chants openly question the legitimacy of the entire political system. That is a red line. Once protests move from demanding reform to challenging authority itself, they become existential. So why do Iran's protests feel different this time? Because they combine four powerful elements. Economic desperation that affects nearly everyone. Nationwide participation across regions and classes. A harsh, militarized state response. And open challenges to the system's legitimacy. This does not mean the regime will collapse tomorrow, but it does mean Iran has entered a far more unstable and unpredictable phase. And instability in Iran never stays confined within its borders. What happens next will matter far beyond Iran itself. First, if Iran weakens internally, the shockwaves will travel across the Shia-aligned network that Tehran has spent decades building. Groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis, and Iran-aligned militias in Iraq and Syria all depend directly or indirectly on Iran's political stability, resources, and credibility. A distracted or economically constrained Iran would struggle to project influence the way it once did. Second, prolonged unrest inside Iran could quietly bolster Western and regional alliances, not through intervention just but through patience. Sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and strategic containment would appear validated, reinforcing coordination between the United States, Europe, Israel, and key Gulf partners. But there is a third, less discussed possibility. If Iran absorbs this pressure and survives, even partially, it will emerge more hardened, more securitized, and more inwardly disciplined. In that scenario, the United States and Israel will be forced to reassess their assumptions. New tactics, new pressure points, and new strategies would be required, because a system that survives prolonged internal challenge rarely returns to its old form. That is why these protests matter. Not because they guarantee change, but because they force every major power to prepare for multiple futures at once. Protests also have high effectiveness because they are led by common masses, rallying behind women rising against theocratic principles. And in geopolitics, uncertainty is often more destabilizing than defeat. Thus, it's wait and watch for next few days.